Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Simplilearn webinar today. I'm Dan Bevener, your host and moderator. Today, we're going to be talking about how radical analytics can uncover blind spots in your data. So if you still believe that web analytics is just meeting defining objectives, asking about KPIs, embracing a data-driven culture, well, your ROI is kind of sneaking out the back door. So if you want to dive into the ocean of data and find that one unique golden nugget of wisdom that will transform your organization, well, you can't do it like everybody else is doing. Mainstream web analytics are dead. It's time to go radical, and that's what this is all about. So today we're going to learn how to break the cycle of meaningless web analytics and then begin to rule by breaking all the rules. So now before the end of this webinar, we'll have a question and answer session. So if you want to ask a question, then the best way to do that is to open your control panel here. You're muted at the moment because we have so many people online here. And if you can't see your panel, just check that little red arrow that's off the side of your screen, open the panel, and then type your question into the question field, and then we will get to it, we'll address it as soon as we can. So with that, I want to introduce to you our guest and our presenter. We're really happy to have our speaker, Stephane Hamel, named the most influential industry contributor by the Digital Analytics Association. Stephane is a consultant and distinguished thought leader. He's recognized as a Google product strategy expert in 2016, and he's also the faculty chair here for digital analytics at Simplilearn. He co-manages the largest Google Analytics user community on Google+. Stephane holds an MBA specialized in e-business, and he's held board positions with the Digital Analytics Association and taught graduate-level digital analytics marketing courses at Laval University. So, Stephane, thank you for joining us. How are you doing?
My pleasure.
Great.
Thanks for the intro. Always a pleasure to have this opportunity to share my thoughts and share some of my experience, and the experience I honestly grabbed from talking to other people also. So I'm glad that I didn't have to go through all of those pain points that I'm going to talk about, but hopefully it's going to help other people kind of go faster and not repeat those mistakes.
That's great. Well, if you're ready, Stephane, I'll pass the controls over to you, and we'll sit down and get radical.
All right. Okay, so you should see my screen now.
That looks great.
Okay, perfect. Great. So let's talk about radical analytics. This is something I've been starting to look into after a while. A couple of years ago, I started looking at the concept of digital analytics maturity. How some organizations are very successful, and most others are basically struggling and failing at reaping the benefits of digital analytics, or web analytics, if you want to call it this way. So in this webinar, we're going to talk about a brief overview of what are the premises behind the concept of radical analytics. I'm going to try to show a couple of examples where we can use those concepts to better define a realistic roadmap, or better define objectives and KPI. And while I do that, obviously, I'm not God. I want you to keep in mind that anything I'm going to say, you might find it a little bit radical, in fact, and that's fine. That's fine, because I want people to exercise critical thinking, and there's really no magic recipe. Some of those points might readily apply to your environment, and maybe some others won't make sense for you, but that's perfectly fine. It started by just thinking about the way we've been doing web analytics for the past 10 years and more. I've been doing it for over 10 years. In fact, I started on the web 25 years ago when it came out. And we've always, mostly for the most part, we've had a very similar approach to it. Let's see what are the objectives. Let's start from the objectives, because it makes sense. What is the business objective? Maybe what is your manager's objective? Or maybe what's even your own personal objective. Let's start from that, and think about what success looks like. And then we're going to define KPIs and dashboards, and we're going to add tags to our websites and so on. So there's all those concepts and a very, I would say, classic approach to it. And we've been trying to do that for 10 years. And then I started asking people at conferences and my clients, and I'm coaching agencies so they can develop their own analytics practice. So through those conversations with people I have a lot of respect for in the industry, I started asking, okay, tell me really, how is it going for you? Is it really working? What have you tried and that worked, and what doesn't work? And usually there's a lot more conversation around what doesn't work. And then we hear about those amazing organizations that are very successful, and they become flagship examples of how analytics should be done. But they are very different from the vast majority of organizations and clients, if you're on the agency side, and clients that you work with. So where do we start? Do we start from objectives? Do we turn them into SMART objectives because we've been told that that should be the way to go, right? Do we take a more investigation approach of asking the 5 W's plus 1 H, which what, when, where, how, and so on? Is it a right way to do it? And then of course there's politics gets involved, priorities get shifted, and you end up oftentimes guessing what is the objective. So, if we could achieve something, would we have something to celebrate? If we could make it work, would we be able to celebrate? So maybe that's one way to ask what is the objective, or if you know how the bonus is defined, how it is calculated, maybe you should work to measure what are the underlying metrics that will be used for determining the annual bonus, for example. But all of those are not necessarily very easy, because in my experience, usually what happens is when you ask managers or clients what are your objectives, oftentimes they simply don't know. And I've seen that more often than the opposite, right? And even if I was going to ask you, what is your personal objective, most likely it's not something that you think about every day, every week, every month. It's something maybe once a year, twice a year, you sit down and you think about, okay, what are my personal objectives? So we heard about the concept of the elevator pitch challenge. So I have a challenge for you. If I was going to ask you, let's suppose that we're in a conference environment, or we're meeting face-to-face over coffee, and I ask you, what is your current measurement framework or analysis process? Would you be able to explain to me in 5 minutes what it is that you're doing? How are you bringing value to the organization? And then it's interesting because recently there was an article where someone asked 42 people in the industry, what is your #1 strategy to define actionable KPIs? And reading the results of that, of this simple question, what I saw is 42 different answers. So if we knew how to do web analytics or digital analytics, by now we should have one way to define actionable KPIs. There should be a methodology, a process to do that. And yet, even people who are experienced in the industry, nobody agrees on what it is to define actionable KPIs. 42 different answers. That was shocking. And all of those answers are actually pretty good. But there's no universal recipe. So all of those elements contributed to my desire to think differently. If we've been trying to do it for 10 years and it doesn't quite work the way we want, maybe we should try something different. So as I was mentioning, I've been looking at digital analytics maturity for nearly 10 years now. And I created the digital analytics maturity model, and it goes into 5 different critical areas. And the first one being governance, culture, and adoption. So essentially, what is your organization already data-driven or data-informed, or not? What is the level of buy-in from senior management and so on? The other dimension is what is the scope of what you're trying to accomplish? Are you trying as a digital analyst or as a marketer, are you trying to optimize AdWords conversions, click-throughs and conversions, or are you trying to optimize multiple brands across multiple geographies for multiple products and different audiences and so on? So the scope is the playground, how big and complex it is. And the objectives, of course, are what you are trying to accomplish. And then you have the team and the expertise, who is part of the team, and that extends to external partners, consultants, subcontractors, and things like that. Who is in the team, and what are their skill sets? Are they complementary to each other? And then we have the continuous improvement process and methodology. So how do you go about, how do you do analytics? What are the steps that you go through? And as part of the maturity model, there's a self-assessment, and this area is systematically the weakest spot. If we had a good methodology, we would be able to repeat success. We would say, okay, we've learned, and we can apply almost the same steps and repeat success, and over time become more efficient. And the last one is the tools, the data, and the technology. So, I often say it's not about the tools, it's about your ability to leverage those tools. So I don't care if you have the most expensive, shiny object, if you're not able to use it, if you're not making good use of it. So I've seen organizations that have just basic tools, but they leverage those tools to the maximum extent. So the goal is, in order to be successful, you need to balance all of those 5 areas. So if you have one aspect that is very, very high, but the other ones are lower, you're going to fail. If you have one aspect that is much lower than the other one, let's say process and methodology is the weak spot. So everything on a scale of 1 through 5 would be, let's say, at level 3, but your methodology is at level 1, then you're going to be struggling to bring value to the organization. So I would rather see an organization where the 5 areas are balanced, even if it's at a lower level, because that would mean that at this level of maturity, you're bringing the most value to the organization based on the capacity that you have to bring those values. So this was really a starting point, and eventually, a couple of months ago, I started looking at radical analytics, and I wrote a manifesto for radical analytics. And there's 8 premises. So for the rest of the webinar, we're going to go through each of those 8 aspects, and I'm going to give you examples for each of those. Okay, so let's start with digital analytics is dead. So we called it web analytics, we called it online analytics, we called it digital analytics. I think we're getting to a point where it will just not make any sense to make a distinction between the fact that it's digital or not. And I came up with this definition of analytics. It's how an organization arrives at an optimal and realistic decision informed by data. And each of those words was carefully chosen. The how and arrive to something implies that there's a process, there's a destination, there's a goal. Organization can be profit, non-profit, can be multinational, can be government, can be academic, doesn't matter. Optimal and realistic is super important because oftentimes I see analysts that are making recommendations based on what would be the optimal. What would be the perfect scenario in an ideal world? And obviously, they complain that management doesn't act on their recommendation. Why? Because they couldn't balance what is the optimal versus what is realistic. What are the constraints of the organization? Is it time, money, politics, regulations, resources, name it. So if you could balance the best solution given the constraints, there would be absolutely no reason not to act on your recommendations. So when that happens, usually it's because you are missing some elements. There's things that you don't know. Otherwise, your recommendation would be acted on right away. And then decision implies that there's going to be some decisions, some actions, and it's informed by data. It's not driven by data. We don't become data-driven because the data doesn't decide anything on its own. Even with machine learning and artificial intelligence, it's because we've delegated that responsibility, but all of its own, data doesn't do anything. It informs our decisions. So based on this definition, we could say that does it really matter if it's digital or not? Isn't everything digital anyway? The data we use typically ends up being digital. That's one aspect of it. The other aspect is we need to think about the consumer, the user. And the user is a multi-channel, online, offline experience of your brand. Looking at it just from the digital lenses doesn't make any sense. And I would even push further and say, well, looking at it only from the marketing standpoint doesn't make any sense either, because the customer experience transcends all of the marketing functions, all of the business functions, I should say. And marketing is just one of those functions. So given this definition, what is the ultimate goal of your organization? Why does your organization exist in the first place? Are your objectives tied to that ultimate goal? Would you be, in the food industry, you are able to track exactly where your steak is coming from. So are you able to track how this specific metric is contributing to the greater goal, and seeing how it's making progress? So, at the end of the day, any organization has conceptually a very similar structure or very similar ultimate goals. We want to increase revenue, but we also want to reduce costs, and this will lead to profits. If you can't balance the two, if your costs are greater than revenue, obviously, you're not in for a long run. But then you also need to increase satisfaction. You need to increase and keep customer satisfaction. But I would extend that to beyond customers. It includes employees, investors, government. It includes any stakeholder that have an interest to stay engaged with your organization. And when you combine that, it leads to a sustainable organization. So you're going to be there in the long run. So if you're not able to tie your objective and your metrics to one of those boxes, then there's probably something wrong that you're doing. You need to be able to do the trace back of where it came from. So in reality, a good business objective shouldn't be channel specific or marketing or business function centric. It should transcend the customer experience regardless of the touch point, and it should transcend the business functions. So now, what is the next premise? DMAIC is your best friend. Let's ask a simple question. Is your job hard? If you're listening to this podcast, you probably have an interest to understand. You probably go through some struggles. There are some issues, challenges. Where are you going to go with your career? What's going on, right? So your job is probably not easy, and you know what? That's perfectly fine. Of course, your job is not easy, and that's why you're there. You're supposed to be an analyst. You're supposed to be a marketer. So it's perfectly fine that your job is not easy. Otherwise, you would be out of a job. They wouldn't need you. So if we said that we had a definition for analytics, and now we can have a definition for analysis. Analysis is how to break something complex into smaller parts so that we gain a better understanding. And if we understand how it works, we're going to be able to measure, and we're going to be able to optimize. But guess what? This should start with your own job. If the worst thing you can do is to complain about the fact that your job is hard, because you're going to lose all credibility. If you're the analyst, if you're supposed to be able to break something complex into smaller parts, and God knows your job is complex, the environment, the business environment is complex, the technologies are complex. But if you keep complaining that your job is hard, how do you expect to convince management and other people that you're going to be able to break the complexity of the business and measure it and optimize it? So maybe we should stop complaining and really do something about it. So good thing is we're not the first ones to think about that. We're not the first one to think that there are things that needs to be improved and measured and optimized. So Lean Six Sigma is highly recommended. It's a set of practices that have been used in manufacturing environment initially, but are really applicable to anytime you have a process, and everything is a process. Marketing is a process. So you define a campaign, you execute a campaign. There are steps. There's a process to it. So you can break it down into small parts. You can measure each step. You can optimize each of those steps. Lean Six Sigma uses a lot of segmentation, slicing, and dicing of data. And it's perfectly suited for an environment where things are shifting and moving all the time. So there's just 5 simple steps to get going. There's define, measure, analyze, improve, and control. So define what is the problem, what is the opportunity. Measure is collect the right data, look at the quality of this data. Analyze is find if there's correlations and patterns in combining multiple sources of data, for example. Improve is where you might be doing an A/B or multivariate testing. It's where you would make your recommendations. And there would be, because we call it analytics, there would be a decision, there would be action based on your recommendation. Then you want to control. So in the define phase, you defined what are the boundaries, what is the scope, who is involved, what are the processes, what are the limits, but also what are the metrics. So the control is going back and looking at those metrics over time. Does it really work? Did you really bring change and value to the organization? And then you repeat that. So what we aim to do is to reduce the cost of complexity. That's optimization, right? And we want to increase velocity. And velocity is your ability to reduce the time between the moment you find a problem and the moment you solve a problem. Or take it another way, the moment you see an opportunity and the moment you can actually capture this opportunity. So increasing velocity means that the wheel is turning faster and you bring more value faster. And it's, in a sense, we could say, well, we want to make it easy to do business with. I had a manager that kept repeating me this statement. And there's tons of books and training, and in fact, there's even a good training from Simplilearn about Lean Six Sigma. There's a couple of courses. This is one of them. So you don't have to reinvent the wheel, since the area, from a maturity standpoint, the area of process and methodology is the weakest spot in the self-assessment. Go and learn about this. It's going to be a really good start. Next point is never ask, always propose. This is one of my favorite one. What's the difference between closed-ended questions versus open questions? So suppose you make a recommendation and you ask your manager, okay, can we do it or not? The manager is faced with a yes-no answer. There's no other options. Either you do it or either you don't. That's it. So this is probably not the best way to approach it, because there's no alternatives. Well, if you just ask, what is your objective? What do you want to track? What do you want to see in the report? what the risk is, the person in front of you, you can be guaranteed that they're going to make up something. If they're going to find something to tell you, because of course they're not stupid, right? So if you ask what's your objective, once they tell you what is their objective, you're stuck with that. Even if it's not a good objective, even if it's not defined properly. So when you simply ask someone what is your objective, you basically open the door that they're going to tell you what they want. They won't tell you why they want it. And that's super important from an analyst standpoint. You want to know why. You should always ask why all the time. And when you just open the door like this, you put yourself in a context where gradually you become a reporting monkey. That's a pretty negative term, meaning that you know how to extract data from the various tools that you're using. You spit out reports, but nothing gets done with it, because you created that possibility yourself by asking the other person what to do. So instead, never ask, always propose. So always come prepared. Give options. Start with A-B options, or ABC, and ask questions. So even if it's not perfect, at least you go into a dialogue. So resist the fact that the person will simply tell you what to do. You need to understand why you should be doing it. So that gives me an opportunity to talk about product thinking. And product thinking is a relatively new way of thinking about objectives and priorities and things like that when you have a startup, especially a technology startup. So you think about the user first. What is the problem that you're trying to solve for a specific audience? And then the vision is, is it aligned with your strategy? Why are you doing this? Why do you want to solve the problem in the first place for this audience? And the strategy is, okay, how are we going to solve the problem for this specific problem, specific audience? So you have a problem solution fit, right? And next you have outputs. The goal is what do we want to achieve by doing that? And what are we going to do specifically? So now we're getting more into the tactics of how to do it, and we're going to be able to measure success. So if you combine those three simple boxes or steps, you can end up with a nice statement. In order to achieve our vision or our mission as an organization, our product or service will solve a specific problem for a specific target audience by giving them something they need that is aligned with our strategy, obviously. And we will know it works when we see a specific goal being achieved using those specific metrics. So that kind of replaced the former SMART objective approach with something that is more, I think, more tangible or more appropriate for what we're doing. So now, instead of making a recommendation and asking yes, no, instead of opening the door and asking what you want to do, what if you came with something like 2 or 3 statements like those and said, okay, if I understand your objective, if I understand the business, if I understand what we're trying to achieve as an organization, I think we should be working on A, B, or C. And this way you lead the conversation. And maybe it's not perfect, but at least you have a dialogue, and it can be much better than the other way around. Okay? Next one, eat your own dog food. This one is something I heard when I was working at Microsoft, and at the time, back in the days, Microsoft decided to embrace the internet, and they created their own web server. And I was used to run the Netscape server. So honestly, when Microsoft decided that they wanted to have their own web server, we had, as a Microsoft employee, we had to switch everything from Netscape to the Microsoft IIS server. And in the early days, that didn't really work well. But we had to eat our own dog food. We had to preach what we, or do what we preach. So let's apply what we do in terms of analysis and optimization and measurement to our own job. So anyone who have done some project management or studied project management know about the triple constraint model, where you have cost, time, and scope. So if you want something faster, you either have to reduce the scope or increase the cost to allocate more resources to do it. If you want to reduce the cost, increase the time or reduce the scope, and so on and so on. So if you apply that to your own job, one of the things I hear very often is how digital analysts and marketers are just swamped by too much work. They are working on so many things that they don't have time to even think about ways to simplify their job. So what if you were asked to cut 10% of what you do, or 20, or even 50%? What if you were asked to destroy your business, which is something that Jack Welch talked about years ago, where if you had the opportunity to start again from scratch in your job, in your current position, what would you do differently? What are the tools? What are the other people you would hire if you're a manager? So thinking about that is going to be useful, because there's different activities you can do to optimize your job. You can review roles and responsibilities. You can think of the 8 wastes of lean, and some of them maybe they don't readily apply to our industry, but waiting, for example, might be a good example of how often do you have to wait for data to be ready to come in? Why do you do reporting once a month when it could be self-served at any time? That could be a way of removing yourself from a low-value function, which is providing monthly reports and empowering people to access those reports whenever they want it. And of course, upfront it's going to be more work, but you have to do those things in order to improve your own job function. Learn to say no. Given the roles and responsibilities, how can you say no to requests that simply don't make sense, right? And lastly, take the lead. Don't wait to be told what to do. Make propositions, make suggestions based on what you control, manage, and influence. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about those 3 aspects of control, manage, and influence. So all of this to say, think about ways to optimize your own job. Because if you can optimize your own job, you're going to be in a much better position to optimize the business. So let's talk just a little bit about the responsibility matrix or RACI matrix. This is one way to review the roles and responsibilities of what you do and other people in your team. So you identify all of the tasks and who is responsible for doing the work, who's accountable for, let's say, signing off and approving it, who needs to be consulted, and who needs to just stay in the loop. Consulted are subject matter experts. For example, if you work on a project where you have some cookies and you have some things that you're not too sure from a legal standpoint, well, you don't have a lawyer in your team, so you will consult a subject matter expert on those aspects. Informed are typically stakeholders to whom you would probably send your reports and stuff like that. So why is this important? Because you have what you think your job is. That's your role conception. And then there's a disconnect with what other people think that you should be doing. What is your role? So that's the expectation from other people. And then there's another disconnect. And finally, there's the whole behavior, which is what you actually do in your job. So there's a big difference between what you think your job is, what other people think you are doing, and what you actually do, right? So you want to, this responsibility matrix is a way to realign those 3 aspects as much as possible. So this is an example of a workshop where we regrouped the 5 members of the team, and we categorize different tasks into different responsibilities. So it's a coincidence, but the different colors represent different type of jobs. And we regroup them into the outcomes and actions, basically what is the business side of things, enabling capabilities like tagging and managing data and stuff like that, creating reports. And the analysis is where you typically would do the bulk of the work. And notice how many post-it notes there are on the enabling capabilities side of things. So a lot of tasks to collect and get the data ready, but on the analysis side of things, there's actually less items than the two others. So this is, doing something like this requires time, dedication. It can get emotional because you realize that what you thought was useful, it might not be that useful in the eyes of the other team members and so on. But it's absolutely worth doing it. And again, that's something that you can find information about RACI matrix. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. So next one, we have a couple of other points to go through. Don't seek executive buy-in. So what we've been told, and Tom Davenport is very well respected, wrote a very good book, Competing on Analytics. And one of the things he says is, like any major transition, becoming data-informed, data-driven requires leadership from executive at the very top who have a passion for this approach of being data-driven. That makes a lot of sense, right? But the reality is executive sponsorship is something that you are really lucky if you work in an environment where you have a senior manager who is already data-driven, and then it's going to trickle down. It's going to start at the top, and it will gradually go through all of the organization. So the problem with that is, yes, executive sponsors can overcome the major roadblocks, but they tend to work on big issues. They tend to have grandiose, novel solutions that they want to work on, and that's going to be time. It's going to take time. It's going to be costly, and it's going to be risky. So when I go to conferences, we were, it's a bit of an echo chamber where we think as digital analysts, we're going to become the CEOs of the future, right? Well, not sure about that. Maybe one day that would be great, but for the vast majority of other organizations, there's simply no. It's not true that you're going to go knock on the door of the CEO and say, "Hey, Mrs. or Mr. CEO, I'm the digital analyst. I have this great idea." No, that doesn't work this way. You won't get a seat at the big table. That's not how it works. If you're lucky, yes, all right, good for you. But most of the time, the way it works is through grassroots ideas, grassroots innovation, because the people that are, I would say, at the bottom of the food chain, the people who are actually doing the work, they know what works and what doesn't work. They have great ideas of small improvement, quick iteration that leads to incremental victories. That's a lot easier. So rather than trying to improve one thing by 100%, what about improving 100 little things by 1% at a time? So the result won't be a linear improvement. It's going to be exponential because you're going to be able to bring additional value faster. You're going to increase velocity by bringing small incremental improvements faster. That's going to lead to an exponential curve. So I mentioned I was going to talk about manage, control, and influence. So what are those three things? The control aspect is those are the tasks that you already do. You should control those tasks. If you don't, this is the first place where you can improve your work. So improve your own processes. Find ways to deliver more value at a lower cost. And lower cost means, oftentimes it means saving time or completely getting out of the loop. Quantify your work, measure what you do. This way you're going to be able to prove to your manager that you actually bring value to the organization. Think about in terms of agile development, they have ways to measure the value of what they deliver. Just read about that, learn about it, and use those same metrics. That's going to work for you. Manage is what you are accountable for. So if you are in a management position, or if you work with subcontractor, for example, you are accountable for their work. You allocate resources, and you have to motivate them toward the goals. So those are the things you manage. And influence are areas where you are a subject matter expert yourself. And those are potentially new areas where once you manage and control the things that you should be doing, then you can think about growing your influence and getting a larger scope for digital analytics or analytics in general. Embrace Agile or die. Classic waterfall project management simply doesn't work for analytics. It just doesn't make sense in the digital world where things are moving so quickly, opportunities are coming all the time, there's always new things to fix, and so on. So we need to be very agile in the way that we address our work. So obviously, I won't go through all of those 12 principles, but what I did is I borrowed the 12 principles of Agile. I looked at it and I thought, well, they all apply to the way we should be doing analysis. I just had to do minor changes to those descriptions, but this is essentially what we should be doing. Analytics is not a one-time project. It's a way of living the organization. It's a way of thinking. It's a way of, simply put, it cannot be a single project, because a project has a starting date, it has a end date, and it has a scope. And what happens when the project is over? Well, everybody goes back to the next project. That doesn't make sense, right? So analysis is a continuous process of improvement. Uncover the unknown unknowns. There's this famous statement from Donald Rumsfeld. So one of the other reasons why you want to embrace Agile is that if you try to have perfect business objective, perfect KPIs, perfect dashboard, perfect reports, perfect tagging, perfect everything, you will never get there. So the sooner you can start to get some data, you're going to be able to uncover the unknown unknowns, the things that you could never have thought that they existed until you actually started to do something, until you actually started to get data, look at it, and find the unexpected, and then react on those things. So one way to do that is I've become a fervent advocate of pilot projects or proof of concept or experiment. The funny thing is, sometimes when I say, oh, we should do a proof of concept to a client, they say, oh, no, don't ever call it proof of concept. We've tried that before, and it's a cursed word. We never use the term proof. Well, okay, let's call it an experiment or call it a pilot project, whatever the term you want to use. But the idea is, remember how analysis is how to break a complex topic into smaller parts so that we can understand how it works, we can measure, we can optimize. Well, if breaking something complex in small parts implies lowering the risks and implies not a right to fail, but a right to learn. Because regardless of the outcome of the experiment or proof of concept or pilot project, regardless of the outcome, now you know something. You know something that you didn't know before. Whether your hypothesis turned out to be false or true doesn't really matter. The important thing is now you know that it works or it doesn't work. And if you think in terms of Agile or in terms of a startup, you would think, okay, what is the minimum viable solution that I can put out there, start to bring some value, start to make a change, make a difference, not in a year from now, not in six months from now, but try to work in a reasonable chunk of time. That would be every month. or maybe even every week if you can do it. But if it's a project that is going to take too long, the risk and the likelihood that you're going to get there is much lower. So an actual example, I have a client right now who wants to create, review their dashboards. They used to have Excel reports, and now they want to review those, they want to review dashboards and KPIs and so on. So we went through the exercise of, okay, let's revisit what are the goals, the business objectives, define some KPIs and so on. Do we have the right data to do it? But in terms of dashboard, we shouldn't wait to have the perfect solution that will get all of the data from a data lake and magically spit out amazing dashboards. That simply won't work. So what I recommended is, let's start with, okay, there's 2 KPIs that we can be pretty sure that they are they are fine, they are the right one, everybody agrees. Let's start with those 2 KPIs. That's it, nothing else. And let's prove that we can actually deliver value. And the data lake is not there, that's fine. Let's hook up directly to the other data source, the original data source. Don't wait for perfection, because you will never get there. So I want to leave you with this last one. Analysts are change agents. So what is the difference between an analyst and a manager? There's one simple big difference. Analysts were given the privilege of making recommendation. Through their analysis, they have the privilege of coming back to managers and saying, okay, I looked into it, this is what I found, this is what I recommend. Managers have the power of decision. So there's a bit of a disconnect between the two. But imagine when you make a recommendation, imagine you are the manager. Would you say yes to your recommendation? Would you go forward? If you wouldn't, then it's obviously not a good recommendation. So what, as a teacher to future MBAs and marketing masters, hopefully in the coming years, we're going to see, and with the evolution of the industry also, we're going to see more managers who are data savvy. They understand what is analytics, and they will want to leverage this possibility. And eventually, analysts of today are going to become managers, and they will understand the importance of doing analytics, right? So in the meantime, what can you do about it? What we want to look at is people who have a depth of knowledge versus a breadth of understanding. So is it better to master a specific tool, or so that would be very vertical, or is it better to understand the concepts as they might apply in different tools? Is it better to understand the concepts of marketing, which would be a breadth of understanding, or understand marketing for the specific vertical very deeply, the specific vertical where you work, let's say automotive or finance or insurance and so on. So when you build a team, you want to look at people who, a balance between people who have a depth of knowledge in some areas, in some specialties, but also a breadth of understanding across different business disciplines. And in the market, what we see is, obviously, there's a lot of digital analysts and marketers who learned through the digital world. They know about social, they know about the web, they know about mobile, but maybe they were not exposed to the concepts of marketing very broadly. Some people learned how to master Google Analytics, but maybe they lack some breadth of understanding of the concepts of doing analysis, right? So in the picture I showed about the RACI workshops, there was the post-it notes were positioned in a triangle. So we have the business outcomes and actions. It starts there. They set the strategy and the goals so they can be communicated to as business requirements and objectives to people who are able to enable those capabilities. And that includes what are the technologies involved, What is the information architecture of the website? How do you do tagging? How do you leverage big data technologies and so on? So they make it possible. And they supply the means, the tools, and the data. So people who have more of an analysis background, understand statistics, have a problem-solving approach, are able to synthesize a lot of information into something they can communicate effectively as actionable insight and recommendation back to the business. So the thing is, individually, you have a strong area. Regardless of the three, I guarantee you that one area, you look at it and you think, yeah, this is really what I like. I'm good at it. This is what, when I wake up in the morning, this is what I want to do. And then there's another area, maybe you do a good job, you can manage. And the third area probably is something, if I have to make a choice, this is not what I would be doing. So if you think about someone, a typical web analyst or a social media analyst, they might be good at the enabling side of things because they need to understand the specifics of what they are analyzing for. Is it social media? Is it Facebook, Twitter, and so on? Is it a website? But they are probably strong on the analysis side of things, right? So they can do all of those things, but maybe they cannot be good at everything, right? So maybe the business is going to be the weak spot. Think about the data scientists. Data scientists are super strong on the enabling capability side of things, right? And they are usually pretty strong also on the analysis, but business, no, not really. Think about a marketer now. Marketers, they are good on the business side. They might be fairly good on the analysis, but typically they are not the ones who are going to be thrilled by putting tags on a website and coding some JavaScript and doing queries into a database. So find out what really drives you. And if you, as a team, what you want to do is to balance all of those skills in order to have empowered analytics. So that's why working as a team is always better, and find people or train people, learn using the training from Simplilearn to develop those abilities in those various dimensions. So wrapping up, execution is not an event. Analytics is not a project. It's not a one-time push toward achieving a goal. It's a way of life. So good analysis, good analytics. I hope you enjoyed it. And now we can go for some questions.
Great, thank you so much, Stephane. Now, those of you that want to ask some questions, feel free to click on the red arrow if your control panel is docked, and open it up, and then pop open that question panel and feel free to type something in there. We already have a few people asking questions. One is Jamal wants to know, what is the difference between a data scientist and a data analyst? I know you kind of explained this a little bit in your triangle that you just showed, but
yes, yeah.
It is a pretty distinct field.
Yes, and what's interesting is when you look on, a couple of years ago, there was virtually no training on how to become an analyst, be it very technical or be it more business oriented. And now you look at, there's just a ton of different ways to learn about becoming a data scientist, and there's a little bit of a buzzword around that term, honestly. So data scientists typically know more about the enabling capabilities. They know about the R language, for example. They know about Python. They know about SQL queries they can put against a database. They know about the data structure behind it. They are the one who will actually look at the data and build a model. And that model, so through their skills here in the enabling capabilities and their ability to learn to leverage statistics and predictive modeling and stuff like that, they will build a model. And that model is going to be used by the business. Right? While data analysts, typically, they take, and building a model in data science, it's not something like, oh yeah, okay, let's do a quick analysis and we're going to turn out a model in a day. Usually it takes longer than that. Data analysts usually start have a different approach because they start with a specific business question that might be a one-of, maybe it's an ad hoc question, and they will use their ability to leverage, so using, for example, a Lean Six Sigma approach of define, measure, analyze, improve, and control. They will take that question, they will go and ask the right questions to the data in order to come back with an answer to the business. So I see that as being two different areas. The other difference also is that data scientists, obviously, they don't limit themselves to web data or mobile analytics or social data. They can work with any type of data, and they are used to work with the low-level granular data. While most of the time, data analysts, they work with a black box. They work with Google Analytics. They work with Adobe Analytics. They work with packages that are abstracting the complexity of what is going on behind the scenes. So they don't have to know as much about the underlying nitty-gritty details of how it's working, because what they want to get to is, what is the question? What is the answer?
Great, thank you. So Andrea wants to know if is hands-on experience better at teaching data analytics than doing coursework, or I guess that would be a recommendation as to the best way to learn this, particularly on the radical analytics side.
Yeah, well, I think it's a balance of the two. For example, through Simplilearn, the course that I'm teaching on Simplilearn, I'm talking about the concepts. I'm talking about the breadth aspect of it. So what are the broad concepts that you need to master, that you need to understand in order to be a good data analyst? But I won't go into the specific details of how to use Google Analytics to do this and that, because there's plenty of resources to do that. But you need both. You need gradually you need to develop that experience with specific tools, because that's how you become efficient at answering the questions. Knowing what questions you need to answer to ask is the breadth of understanding. That's where it comes from, and that's oftentimes through either formal academic learning, through things like Simplilearn, or even reading books and stuff like that. I think it's a balance of both that you need. And yes. Specifically for radical analytics, a lot of those things, obviously, I'm working on it right now, so it's a work in progress, and there's probably not many other places to learn about, except maybe going into, I'm writing articles on the Medium platform. Mm-hmm. So if you go to this bit.ly link, Radical Analytics, you will find the manifesto, and from there, there's links to other articles that I've already written about that, and there's more to come.
Thank you very much, Stephane. We're about out of time, and I've been your moderator, Dan Bievener, and please join us again here at Simplilearn. And if there's anything else you'd like to say, Stephane, take us out.
All right. Thank you very much for having me, and always a pleasure. And if there's follow-up questions, just reach out, and happy to answer.
Great. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a great day.
All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.